All right, so Janet Horseman says, what would be the correct way to understand a generational curse or sin? I listened to your talk with your mate Tom, and I thought the way you explained the connection between sinful behaviors and principalities made so much sense. But do these principalities become more granular, like in the case of mental illness, alcoholism, substance abuse that seems to run in the family? Is there a more particular principality over that reality? So it's not that hard to understand generational curses or generational sin because your children are extensions of you, and so they kind of carry not just you, but of your ancestors, of your line, you could say. And so they kind of manifest those aspects in the world, and that will include the positive and the negative aspects. And a good way to understand a generational curse or sin is to understand that patterns are more subtle often than we think. And so let's say like the pattern of alcoholism, let's say, that's good to use that example. There'll be all these subtle things around it, which won't necessarily be just the drinking. And they'll imbibe the group or imbibe the family. And so, it could be all kinds of things. Pattern of alcoholism could mean that, the father's grumpy in the morning. It's like he's an alcoholic. He's grumpy in the morning. Or he's distant, he's absent. And there's all these things which are there, which make it very difficult because they kind of imbibe the structure. And so then, let's say the child says something like, I'm not going to be like my father. I'm going to be against alcohol and I'm not going to drink. I'm going to be dry because my father was an alcoholic. Then they're participating in the pattern. They can't avoid it, right? Because they're opposing it, but they're also probably imbibing some of the subtler aspects of that behavior, even though they're not drinking. And then that can fall down into the lower into the next generations. And so that's why sometimes it's so traditional peoples will maybe sometimes describe it as something like a form of almost like a form of reincarnation or a form of cycling of the souls, right? Some Jewish traditions have this idea where it's like the souls cycle, but you don't have to understand it in a kind of very kind of gross, a kind of gross idea of reincarnation. You can understand it more as like psychic patterns which fall down onto the next generation, which imbibe them with certain behaviors which lead to other behaviors. And so like I said, so you could try to break the pattern by saying I'm not going to drink, but even by doing that, you're ultimately bringing about the possibility that your child is going to drink in reaction to you now, or by imbibing some of the more secondary patterns that you're still participating in. I don't know if that makes sense. I think that that's the way to understand that, But there's also a way in which the positive behaviors are also they also fall back down on your family, and it's often in the same way, in almost like in a kind of unsaid, un you know an unsaid way, that if you act certain ways and if you are certain ways, you speak certain ways, if you treat your spouse with love and respect, then without telling your kids to do that, they will also imbibe that, And so you can understand this, like you can understand it in ways that maybe are easier to understand. You can maybe understand it. So you can see sometimes something like the children embodying the actions or the subtle patterns of their parents, and so you can find a child that will actually express the anger of the spouse, even though the spouse isn't expressing it, will become like a vehicle of their anger or a vehicle of their resentment. And so never, the spouse might not even have said, would never even say to the child, like, say bad things about their husband or their mother, but the child will notice, will mimic patterns, and will see the implications, even unconsciously, of what is happening, what the dynamic is, and then will kind of, as a fruit, will embody that. And so it's complicated stuff to deal with. I think that that's why you kind of almost have to deal with this at a higher level. You have to deal with it at a level which has more to do with, going to church together. I don't know what to tell you, like just being together and sitting together and sharing positive patterns together so that the negative ones don't take over.